Good morning and good afternoon to friends in Europe, and good evening, of course, to friends that may be dialing in from Asia. Appreciate you joining us for this discussion of American and European interests, common interests really, in dealing with the China challenge. My name is Walter Lohman. I'm the director of the Asian Studies Center here at the Heritage Foundation. We've got a great program lined up, but before we dive in, I wanted to share just a couple tips for making the most of this virtual experience. Number one, please submit your questions through the question tab on the right side of your screen as you face it. Feel free there to share your name and affiliation when you do that. It'd be good to know exactly who you are, and that'll help us out. Number two, if there are any technical issues, they'll only be minor. We just ask for your patience. We're all living in a virtual world now, and a lot of us are working from home and doing this from at home, so we'll fix it right away. Don't worry about it. Hang in there. And the third thing is to let you know that this will all be posted on the internet within the next the next 48 hours on our website. So let's get started. It's hard for Americans to say, I think, especially people steeped in the stories of American commitment to the Pacific in particular, but more generally Indo-Pacific. Those of us who know the story of Douglas MacArthur and World War II and the Cold War and all that. It's hard for us to say, but the truth is we need help dealing with China at this point. It's not because of anything we've done or we haven't done over the years. It's because the task is so enormous. There'll be countries and issues that cause the U.S. problems over the next few decades in the Middle East, elsewhere. But peacefully managing the rise of China will be the defining geopolitical challenge of our times, maybe of the century. I dare say our European friends need us too. They're not bystanders in all of this. They have interests and values at stake in the region, and they can really only serve them if we work together. They're surely not going to get there by throwing themselves on the tender mercies of the Chinese Communist Party. The good thing is that we actually share a vast majority of our respective interests. That is, we, the US and Europe, our common history and habits of cooperation across a wide range of activities, military, economic, political, diplomatic, intelligence. Those things are assets we cannot afford to let go wasting or underperform in the current challenge we have with the Chinese. So that's what we're here to do today, to talk about how we can work together, Europeans and Americans, in pursuit of our common interests and values and managing the China challenge. To do that, we have Deputy Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasian Affairs, Alex Alden, with us in this virtual format. I'm not going to go through a lot of bio here. Our time is limited, but I can't help but note that Alex's official bio says he is responsible for, quote, coordinating efforts to counter Chinese regional influence, quote unquote, something I don't think before this administration was ever explicitly tasked to EUR at State Department. So he's a perfect person to speak to this. He's also worked at the National Security Council staff and on the Department of Defense, so he knows his way around Washington. Then we'll hear from my friend Emmanuel Puig from the French Ministry for the Armed Forces, but I'll tell you a little bit more about him when we get to that point. So with that, let me turn it over to Alex to get us started. So Alex, if you could turn on your camera, and look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. It is really a pleasure to be here this morning with you and the rest of the participants in this discussion. I have to acknowledge it's a truism these days, but we are living in challenging times due to COVID, and I'm happy that we can still somehow find a way to get together and discuss these important issues that are facing us and all of our allies and partners. The COVID-19 pandemic has definitely laid bare some existing challenges to the international order. And we must come together to find a consensus-based solution. The contrast between free democratic societies and autocratic regimes has never been more apparent. I'd like to talk to you a bit about the foundation that the transatlantic relationship transatlantic partnership is for the United States, for our role in the world. And I'd like to discuss then the challenges posed by the People's Republic of China, look a little bit in the genesis of this problem, how we got here, and diagnose some of these challenges, and then discuss maybe some common approaches that we can take. So let me start by saying that as I'm preaching to the choir probably here, but many of you know that transatlantic relationship has been the cornerstone of an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity in our history. Our relationship is built on a foundation of shared values, a commitment to democratic governance, respect for human rights and the rule of law, openness and transparency, and deep economic ties that generate shared prosperity. We now have an opportunity to continue to build on our mutual commitment to our transatlantic values and cooperate and continue to cooperate as we have done in the past 75 years, which have brought so much peace and prosperity to not only to our Atlantic region, but also across the world. So this relationship remains the bedrock of U.S. foreign policy. Now, there are challenges on the horizon, as you pointed out in your opening, in your introduction. And quite frankly, the COVID-19 crisis has revealed more clearly than ever the global power competition in which we currently live. From sowing the disinformation to censoring and silencing its critics, the Chinese Communist Party has shown quite clearly it has no interest in a transparent, open, and democratic future. COVID-19, regretfully, I like to say, it was a containable outbreak. We could have done better. However, through its authoritarian actions and cover-ups, the Chinese Communist Party turned a manageable outbreak into a global pandemic that has killed over 1 million people and brought ruin to the global economy. Secretary Pompeo has spoken to this, and I'd like to just refer to some of his remarks. Quote, "Just think how much better off the world would be, not to mention the people inside China, if we had been able to hear from the doctors in Wuhan and they had been allowed to raise the alarm about the outbreak of a new and novel virus," end quote. Instead of doing this, instead of heeding a sage perspective on this, Beijing did not share information in a timely manner. It delayed scientific collaboration. It denied the world access to physical live virus samples collected in Wuhan and censored scientists and journalists. This behavior is in direct contrast to how we in the United States and in Europe and our allies and partners in Asia operate and how we addressed the crisis. Now, I think to some extent, we have all diagnosed that General Secretary Xi's vision is one to make the world safe for CCP authoritarianism and anti-competitive trade practices, one in which, with which we are at odds and is at odds with the international order that we've established over the past 75 years. This means we must reinvest in our democratic institutions and support a transatlantic partnership for the next 7+ decades, as we have since the end of World War II. Now, I think it's important for us to discuss a little bit the question of how we got here. The COVID-19 has definitely served as a crisis that has been a tripwire to reveal the hand of the Chinese Communist Party, but there is a long story to how we've gotten here. So for the past several decades, we assumed that bringing the PRC into the international economic system would result into a PRC's adherence to the same market-oriented rules and norms that China itself has benefited so much, and it's enabled its tremendous economic growth and development. For those reasons, we welcome the PRC into the global order and continuously encourage democratization, respect for human rights, market-based economic reforms, and the rule of law. There is a rules-based order that we all have been complying with and benefiting from, and unfortunately, the PRC ignores this set of rules of the road, especially when it comes to upholding and protecting human rights. Instead, what the CCP does, it limits academics, diplomats, journalists' access within China, and is also intimidating a lot of CEOs and heads of companies into silence to their malign practices. We were optimistic that engagement with the PRC would lead to shared values or greater convergence, that the international participation of China was going to socialize China into becoming a more benign actor. However, unfortunately, it seems to be working in the other direction, where Chinese access to international institutions has been having the opposite effect, where China has been subverting these for their own often malign effects. Today, we need to recognize that our open arms approach to China did not produce the results we expected, and it is time to take stock of what we have worked, and for those things that haven't worked, how to change course. It has become clear that instead, PRC seeks to reshape the international order to serve their very own narrowly defined interests. Put simply, if the PRC wants to continue to reap the benefits of participating in the international order, it must respect and abide by the rules. However, this time we have to take a very much of a results-oriented approach, as Secretary Pompeo has stated it. So results-oriented, and as Secretary stated, distrust and verify. Now, I would like to shift a bit more on the topic at hand of U.S.-European collaboration, and what I actually am happy to report on increased convergence, especially in the assessment and the challenge. Again, with COVID-19, leaders and publics across Europe have also come to the realization that there is a serious challenge here that we need to confront. To frame this discussion, this is not a matter of European countries or the EU, for that matter, choosing between the United States and China. We are not the ones forcing Europe to choose between us and China. Quite frankly, Beijing is forcing this choice. And there is really no choice when you think of it, when it comes to the values that we share and the free and democratic and open societies versus the Chinese Communist Party's authoritarianism. And this is really about the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese people are being used by the regime for their own purposes. In reality, the CCP is really forcing all of us to affirm our commitment to the international rules-based order and take action to restore the reciprocity and balance in our respective relationships with Beijing. Both the United States and the EU are deeply intertwined with the PRC, whether we are talking about trade, investment, research, or cultural people-to-people ties. And while we are not asking Europe to choose between us and China, we do urge our European friends to take a strong stance against PRC's aggression in defense of the democratic values and interests, particularly respect for human rights, that form the bedrock of the transatlantic partnership. The PRC's recent withdrawal of its signature resolution to the UN Human Rights Council is one example where the EU's firm commitment can make a great deal of difference. The PRC withdrew their resolution only after the EU actively lobbied against it and decided to call for a vote. The Chinese Communist Party remains a significant threat to global democracies and the rules-based international order, and we need to acknowledge that. I think that what I think it's important to speak to, in addition to the human rights and the values challenge, to also discuss the economic practices of what we refer to as the Chinese economic aggression. Beijing's poor record of following through on economic reform commitments and its extensive use of state-driven protectionist policies and predatory practices distort global markets, undermine the rules-based order, coerce partners, as well as damage the environment. PRC subsidies and state-backed preferential loans to its own national champions debilitate fair competition and have created an unlevel playing field for the United States, for American and European companies. As the Secretary has recently said, the CCP is, quote, alienating potential allies, breaking trust at home and abroad, rejecting property rights and the predictable rule of law. But fortunately, there is an awakening across Europe that the Secretary calls the Transatlantic Awakening, and important strides have been made. The EU's recent push to defeat PRC's signature resolution to the UN Human Rights Council was an example that I just mentioned. But there are other many good steps forward. In the last 2 years, the EU released its strategic outlook on EU-China relations, which labels the PRC as an economic competitor and a systemic rival. And it's released the toolbox of measures to mitigate the cybersecurity risks that untrusted vendors present to 5G networks. A number of member states have also signed MOUs and joint declarations with the United States on 5G security. Most of those co-signatories were in Europe. Many European countries also have joined join us to raise awareness on the human rights situation across China. Most recently, in a joint statement on Xinjiang and Hong Kong, co-signed by the United States and 39 of our partners, delivered by Germany to the UN General Assembly's Third Committee. Together, we have shown the strength and strategic value that comes from a united transatlantic front to the challenge posed by the PRC. Now, having shared this common assessment, and quite frankly, some of these assessments we've arrived to jointly, and some we have arrived to independently across the Atlantic, which also speaks volumes to the recognition of the challenge that we're facing, that sometimes we come to the same conclusions independently. That speaks to our shared interests and values, as well to the challenge that China poses. Now, what are the next steps? How can we work together to forge a more common approach? I think what's very important to state, both here in the United States and in Europe, that we all seek a relationship with China that is based on reciprocity and responsibility. It is about a results-oriented relationship, and we cooperate with the PRC in areas where we can achieve real results. This is not about decoupling nor containment, neither of which are feasible or attractive options based on the current state of our relationship and the world. And while Americans and Europeans admittedly might not use the same words to describe how we view international politics or how we even respond to challenges around us, we do approach the world in a very similar fashion, and that is based on those commonly shared interests and values that we have. We have a desire to protect our interests, defend our collective security, promote democratic values, and defend the rules upon which we've worked together to improve the global situation. We encourage European governments and the EU to maintain a firm stance in the face of PRC's increasingly authoritarian and not reciprocal approach to its external relations, as well as its malign influence on governments and societies across the world. We also welcome the many European officials and legislators who speak and openly criticize Beijing's human rights abuses, especially the calls to end the human rights crisis in Xinjiang and Hong Kong. It is through dialogue with our European allies that we build upon our convergence in assessment of this challenge and forge a consensus upon which a common approach can be based. That's why the upcoming US-EU dialogue on the PRC is so important, and I hope to be able to report more on that in the near future. So we shouldn't ignore how closely we work together across the Atlantic on these challenges. I think there is oftentimes coverage on irritants there might be in the transatlantic relationship, but I'd like to state that those irritants are birth pangs of a stronger, deeper, more symmetric relationship between the United States and Europe. I think we should push forward from urging accountability for CCP's actions on the most pressing abuses occurring in some of the regions that I've mentioned, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, but also Tibet, to seek to protect the integrity of international organizations, to continuing and advancing the advocating for the exclusion of non-trusted vendors from 5G networks. We have much in common across the spectrum in those items that I just listed. Together, the United States and European allies have formed the bedrock of an international order which has led to our shared peace and prosperity, and has ensured that it will not be undermined, and will continue to ensure that it is not undermined by malign actors. As we work together on these challenges, we will continue to build upon that foundation, leaving us all stronger and better poised to take on any new crisis that might come our way. I appreciate and I thank you for letting me share my opening remarks, and I look forward to our frank discussions on this very important challenge that will affect our generation and possibly those coming forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Alex. That was a very, very good start to this conversation. To offer a European perspective, we're very pleased to have with us Emmanuel Puig, Dr. Emmanuel Puig, I should say. He's Assistant Deputy Director for Defense Strategy at DG RIS, Director General for International Relations and Strategy at the French Ministry for the Armed Forces. That's a really long title, Emmanuel, but I weathered through it and I read the whole thing. Emmanuel's been at DG RIS for about 5 years, focused on Asia. In fact, he has China studies experience before that. But more important, I think, what commends Emmanuel to this forum today is that he's a very good friend of U.S.-French relations and U.S.-European relations. He really gets it, and he sees the need for us to work together. So we're very happy to have him here to talk to us. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Emmanuel, and look forward to hear what you have to say. Why don't we work with that? Why don't we try to work that out? And in the meantime, maybe Alex could take some questions. Does that make sense? And then as soon as Emmanuel gets up and running, we'll hear from him. How about that? Does that sound good, Alex?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Emmanuel, why don't you turn off your camera and work through that? Yeah, there you go. We'll, as soon as you're ready, let us know and we'll bring you back on. This is actually a good way to do it, sort of questions one at a time here. I encourage folks to send in questions as well if they have some, but you provoke many that I have. One we focus on a lot at Heritage, a set of issues, is the Taiwan issue, and I wonder how you see that with regard to the Europeans. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with with the U.S. position over many years, and I would say, although the Trump administration is really better than any in 40 years on Taiwan. I mean, that's just objectively speaking. Honestly, it's still within the framework of a U.S.-China policy, and so I'm pretty familiar with it. But how have you found the Europeans on this issue?
I think that I will refer to the more recent trip of the Czech president of the Senate, a visit to Taiwan. And as you may know, he led a pretty large delegation. He's given a powerful speech where he's echoed President Kennedy's speech to Berlin and called himself a Taiwanese. And in the wake of that trip, there's been a pretty strong reaction from Beijing, which I think has put a whole lot of European governments in the EU is taken quite by surprise by the strength, kind of the intimidation and the types of threats that they make. So that's all to say that the pandemic, COVID-19, and some of these evolving political situations are getting the Europeans to look at the situation in Taiwan from a new perspective, right? And so I think that in addition to COVID, in addition to these high-level visits, the Hong Kong situation too is having many reflect upon how they approach the question of Taiwan. But that's to say that this is a dynamic and evolving situation, and I would not go further than that. But there's definitely more of a conversation about Taiwan in Europe that you might have had before.
Yeah, imagine. Another question that has actually come to us on the chat here. It's a little bit sensitive, I know, from several different perspectives, but do you think there's a role for NATO to play at all in dealing with this challenge? I mean, NATO has its partnerships and that sort of thing in the region, and the Secretary General goes out there, and does a few visits. But I don't know. What do you see the role of NATO, if anything?
Well, NATO has already referred to China as in the language of something to consider in its effort in the category of challenges and opportunities. So NATO is definitely looking at this dimension. This is something that is being worked by colleagues, and so it's definitely part of the conversation. So now, how that manifests itself and in concrete terms, that's still being discussed, decided. But I can definitely say that yes, NATO is looking at China as a factor, and of course in geopolitics, and clearly affecting to some extent the collective security of its members. So this is already part of the conversation, and I welcome my French colleagues' elaboration of that. Again, ministries of defense probably discussing this more in detail in the NATO context.
Yeah, I mean, the take I hear a lot of times from the European side, and like you said, maybe Emmanuel will have some comment on this too, is that they would do their best, the Europeans, by strengthening NATO with its traditional challenge in its area of responsibility, and in Europe, especially with regard to the Russia challenge, and then that would free us up. But it's always struck me as a little bit too convenient. You know, I mean, we're not asking anyone to move the world, but we're just, you know, give us a ship once in a while. You know, the French do, the Brits do, but more often than not, I hear the Europeans pleading poor when it comes to suggestions that they deploy an asset, say, to South China Sea or Taiwan Strait.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, great. So can I
So
jump
please,
in?
why don't you, yes, please jump in and deliver your remarks however you'd like to proceed. So Alex, you can turn off your camera so that Emmanuel can.
Sorry for that. If you get the impression that I'm speaking from a secure underground facility, well, actually it's the case. We had to override an entire security system here so I could speak to you. So I probably created a security breach. So I hope you appreciate the effort.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be part of this discussion today. I feel like it's an ongoing conversation taking place both with Alexander and Walter, since we already had, especially with Alexander, the chance to address the issue together just a few weeks ago. So I will speak quickly about three things. The first is the situation in Europe vis-à-vis China, the evolution of the situation. The situation as seen from the French MOD and the prospects for EU-US cooperation. So the situation in Europe, what are the trends? 10 years ago, China was first a commercial and second political issue. But for most of the European countries, it was only a commercial issue. The bilateral political agenda was revolving around economic and commercial issues, important ones, but only about that, without a sense of being entangled in a growing strategic competition. But it's not the case anymore. And there's a growing awareness in Europe about the strategic and political agenda of China, especially a growing experience of the Chinese way to divide and rule, through several political frameworks, selected bilateral cooperation within the EU, such as the 16+1 and now 17+1, which is now, I would say, a sensitive issue, contrasting with 8 years ago when its creation went almost unnoticed, completely under the radar at the time. Since the EU's 2016 elements for a new strategy on China, the EU members have been called to take several actions on a number of key issues: market access, reciprocity, investment agreement, global public goods, security, as well as the rule of law and obviously human rights. These documents called for more cohesion, more efficiency, and we have to acknowledge that some progress has been made in investment screening, for example, and the position vis-à-vis China has gradually improved, especially through the fact that we decided to stand firm on the principle of reciprocity for market access, for example. Meaning that the EU won't go further in trade agreements or political statements without it. So it seems that now we are maintaining this position, even though some EU members are still eager to welcome Chinese investment without any specific screening process. At least it seems that there are less counting on this investment right now, but the Chinese influence is still a problem when you deal, for example, with the cohesion of the EU member states, the potential for a joint declaration. And we saw, for example, recently, once again, that it was a problem to to build this cohesion. But still, I think our position has changed, and the fact that Josep Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union, has named China a systemic competitor, clearly showed a shift in the common vision of China in Brussels, echoing what was already taking place in other capitals. And so we took several measures and agreed on a list of principles in order to reduce, for example, Chinese direct leverages, and especially through investments and commercial activities. Recently, we, following the EU-wide screening framework adopted in 2018, several EU countries have updated their or set up new FDI screening policies. France, for example, adopted in November 2018 a new decree expanding the list of sensitive sector in which investment are now subjected to review. So I would say that China as a global power is now firmly in Europe, whether it is through investment, loans, commercial agreements, public diplomacy, political influence. China is still, and probably will remain for the next few years, one of the top lobbyists in Brussels. But we, as EU members, can live with that and mitigate the adversarial effects of such footprint by remaining aware of the stakes, by upgrading our tools and regulation to put a framework over Chinese activities and not let them unsupervised and free-flowing like it was more or less the case. On top of that, I should mention that the effect of the COVID-19 crisis in Europe, and especially the unattended effect of China's poor public diplomacy and the disastrous consequences of its wolf warrior diplomacy. Not only the crisis showed our vulnerabilities in terms of dependency, value chain vulnerabilities, limited market access to China, but it showed also that Beijing did not hesitate to push these buttons to take advantage of our weak position. While in the meantime, kind of waging an informational warfare that attracted a lot of attention in Europe and brought a lot of bad publicity over China. So the key takeaway here, when you look at the situation in Europe, is that despite the remaining work, and there's a lot of work remaining, the awareness that China should be addressed as a strategic issue is becoming almost a basic principle for every European administration, or at least the majority of EU members. And precisely one element which makes me say that is that 3 or 4 years ago, we as French Ministry for the Armed Forces almost never addressed the China issue with our European allies. And now that's not the case anymore. That's a topic every time. So the issue as seen from the French MOD. Our assessment of China as a global power challenging the international rule-based order was very clear in our 2017 strategic review. We added some sophistication in our 2019 defense strategy for the Indo-Pacific, but the original statement was there. The original statement was that from the South China Sea to the eastern shore of Africa, Chinese commercial and diplomatic activities, as well as its military deployment footprints in Djibouti, are changing the strategic landscape. And on the top of that, the US-China competition will definitely frame the strategic issues in the Indo-Pacific, but also elsewhere in Europe, for example. So for France, the fact that dealing with China as a global strategic issue was came more accurately after China set up its base in Djibouti. For us, having to cope with the PLA in our operational environment was not exactly something we were prepared for. That's not the case anymore, but it took time to figure out exactly what to do and how to do that. So now we are taking this major shift into account in our strategic thinking as well as in our defense policies. So in a way, we had no choice but to think strategically about China's global activities with a focus on the Indian Ocean, the Med Sea, the Arctic. So we had a first-hand experience of what could or what was going on. But in Europe, we're not the only one and the only European power concerned. Nowadays, I heard you talking about NATO. The fact that China is a matter of discussion within NATO is definitely a good thing because it raises the awareness and help thinking about the indirect effect of China's influence within NATO member state and all the geostrategic consequences of these moves of the PLA reaching in our geostrategic neighborhood. But in the meantime, we should not forget that the PLA footprint in the North Atlantic, being what it is, we should not lose our strategic raison d'être. And so there's a balance to reach here between awareness, preparedness, and the capability for us to deal with the current China challenge. And looking at the kind of tools and leverages that China is using in Europe, there is no doubt whatsoever that the EU is better equipped and should be the main avenue when dealing with China in Europe. Nevertheless, my point here was to underline the fact that the time when China was a commercial issue is completely over in Europe. And among other things, the global reach of the PLA is something that is also changing the European Union security equation in its environment, in its approaches, because it could have an adversarial effect on how to protect our interests over the medium and long term. So to conclude here, the prospects for US-EU cooperation. First of all, you should not forget who's talking to you right now. I'm just a representative from the French MOD seated in a bunker. So I'm not sure that for many Europeans, I am somewhere near that what they would call a representative. Nevertheless, I think that what is clear is that we, the US and the EU, share the same assessment about China as a challenge to the existing world order. And as Alexander underlined, also we also share the basic assessment about the fact that China's increasing influence, whether it is in the international organization or through its own initiatives, such as the BRI, of course, will have a lot of unexpected and adversarial effects on our principles, values, and interests. So recently, if you take a look at all the recent strategic or political statements issued in Europe on China and the Indo-Pacific, whether it is the French or the strategy or the latest document released by Germany, there is almost no daylight between the US vision, the European vision, and our goals. So I am pretty confident that we are heading the same way and that we will remain fundamentally like-minded and focused on the same goals. The foundations are solid. but it does not mean that the building will be perfect. And in practice, as Alexander underlined, we had irritants. There were some bumps in the road, and potentially other bumps ahead. But we are speaking between friends here. And so if we want to build long-lasting strategic synergy, and I am speaking about a workable one, we as EU members will need at least, I think, two things from the US. And I guess the first thing will be more predictability, meaning that after 4 years, we are now well aware that President Trump's loves arm-twisting policies and disruptive approach. But it is difficult for us to be willing to commit if the only thing we receive is mixed signals about our relevance as a political actor, as a political entity, and the will or the need to cooperate, among other things. The second thing that we will need is reliability, and looking at how the US-China competition is turning right now, I have to say that the fear of most European countries is to be caught between the rock and the hard place. So we are looking at November 3rd with a bit of anxiety, but we hope that no matter what the result is, we could improve our mutual reliance. So to conclude, I would say that, as we say in France, il n'y a pas d'amour, il y a juste des preuves d'amour, meaning that there is no love, just proof of love. So definitely, since we agree on the principles, on the goals, on the long-term objectives, I will say that we should definitely build back better and make this relation great again to better address this China strategic issue. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Emmanuel. I appreciate that. You know, I've got several questions here, a lot of good questions that are coming from the audience, but I wanted to just focus a second on the cooperation question with you. You know, there's a saying in Washington, actually, you should never ask a question you don't know the answer to, but I think since I work at a think tank, maybe it's permissible. Can you give us an idea what the extent of current dialogue with the US is from European perspective, from the French perspective, the current state of it, how intensive is the dialogue, how much is going on in terms of cooperation vis-a-vis China now?
Well, we enjoy an operational cooperation with the US, so we are cooperating on a daily basis on a lot of issues. Mm-hmm. And so with China, the thing is that we had a lot of counterparts at the beginning of this administration, and we had less and less counterparts to talk to as this administration was going on. So once again, the thing is, we don't have a problem on the issue. We don't have any problem on how to define the issue. But when it comes to thinking of operational solution or trying to improve things, we need to be firmly entrenched in our administration, and we need our hierarchy to validate everything we do. So I think that was one of the issue here. We are heading the same way, but sometimes we have to put some things on hold, and for several reasons, and so it's difficult for us to deal with it.
Right. Yeah, I think probably at the Defense Ministry or Ministry for Foreign Armed Forces, you have an easier time than some of the others, I think, in terms of interacting with the United States. That is easier than some others, maybe in the French bureaucracy. Fewer fewer obstacles and that sort of thing. At least that's my guess there. Alex, would you mind turning on your camera and joining us for some of the questions here? I got a question from the audience that I think would be best directed at you, Alex. You mentioned human rights, especially in Tibet, Xinjiang, and some other things. It's got people riveted, actually, especially the situation with the Uyghurs. Are there avenues for cooperation now with Europe to address those issues that we could use better? We could use better. We could make better use of that maybe could be effective in getting attention or getting some action on this.
I would just like to note that I was just in Brussels and Paris about 10 days ago. And so for one thing that I had fruitful discussions on, for instance, on the human rights question is, as you may know, we've issued a Xinjiang business advisory, which actually connects two of the challenges that we face vis-a-vis China. One is the human rights challenge, and the other one is the economic kind of underlying supply chain issue. So the Xinjiang Business Advisory is really raising shining a light upon the issue that some supply chains might be polluted by forced labor, and some companies unbeknownst to them might be in a way involved or with their products or the activities in what's happening in Xinjiang, which is as terrible echoes of the past. And so I think that as we know, President Macron has made a statement that what's happening in Xinjiang is unacceptable, and French Foreign Minister has called attention to that very forcefully. So I think that there is some movement in the corporate social responsibility space that's been developing over the past couple decades, where this challenge of human rights is emerging, and our European partners and allies, just as we do, care quite a bit about it. So I hope that there'll be progress in that, and in shining a light on things and how they connect with the supply chains, which we are all now attentive to because of how COVID has emerged. So people are looking into supply chains, resilience, and kind of the responsibility, moral and legal and otherwise, that they may have some of these situations. So I think
do you find that's more of an accident of our shared values, that we are in the same place on these issues, or is this something that we're talking to each other, that is the U.S. talking to the Europeans about on a regular basis?
I think on this issue and many others, I would say there are, three ways I'll describe it. One is we have dialogues. We have strategic dialogues. We have dialogues with the EU, with the member states. There's a constant conversation. That's to a great extent what we at the State Department are in the business of. So a lot of this has been sharing facts, data, information with our allies and partners, so that they can do their own. As we share our assessments, they can also do their own organic and independent assessments that are based on the way they evaluate these facts. So there's an aspect of that. There's also an aspect which is an emergent convergence on this issue and others, which is rooted again in the fact that we share not only the values but also many interests in common. So some of these things have been emerging in an independent fashion, which is very welcome, right? It is a reflection, as I mentioned earlier, of the underlying foundation that we share. And then number three, not to be underestimated, very, very important. China has really made it so that one cannot look the other way. So the Chinese are the big variable in this greater convergence on the human rights challenge, as well as other things, because they have been so ham-handed in so many things that they're doing, both at home and abroad. At home in China, within their own region, and as well as their actions in Europe and elsewhere around the world, whether it's the human rights abuses to the malign influence, the cyber challenges, the disinformation during COVID, the so-called mask and vaccine diplomacy, the Belt and Road Initiative, and how the debt diplomacy. So that is also a huge factor, right? So the assessment, as you know, the national security community, especially here, but also abroad, has been waking up to the challenge of China for 20-some years, right? I mean, we can go back to the mid-90s Taiwan Straits crisis, to the 2001 Hainan Island incident, right? but there was still a responsible stakeholder, broader approach. And I think now, I think China is emerging in such way that no one can really look the other way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, that's becoming so obvious in a way that 10 years ago or more, some of us were beating the issue so hard and weren't getting listened to very much. But now things have brought it front and center. And I think too often overlooked in this debate is the fact, because we have our own politics going on internally, we have our politics going on with the EU and with Europe, that people overlook. It's really not the US driving this new tension. It's changes that have occurred in China over the last 10 years or so that we're basically slowly waking up to. And then those things are being punctuated now from time to time by the Chinese side. Wang Yi's visit to Europe was a perfect example. He couldn't help himself messing that up, you know, because of where they're coming from. Emmanuel, I wanted to, we only have a few minutes here left, so I wanted to finish up with a couple questions from the floor for you. One regards the divide in Europe, at least a divide that may have been more clear in the past, but you tell us, between the East and the West on matters of China. They have the 17+1 arrangement and seem to have made, the Chinese have made more inroads in eastern part of Europe than in the West. Smaller economies, that helps, and some other things. But anyway, could you give some perspective on that? What's the state of that divide right now on issues related to China?
As I said, it is now a political issue. For years, it has been a kind of organizational issue. Everybody was looking at this 16+1 as a strange thing happening, but no one really cared about. Now it is a political issue within EU member state. I'm not sure that it is reflecting something structural among EU members, because also it has non-EU members within it. But I think at the beginning, the member state found it convenient. Now they could still find it useful, but the challenge for Brussels is now to make it less relevant and to reduce its usefulness. So I'm not sure, I'm unable to make a clear assessment of what the member states achieved through their participation in the 17+1. It seems still attractive since Greece decided to join last year. But I'm not sure that China will be able to deliver better things through this network. As I said, we had also mixed signals from member state. Last week, I guess, the foreign ministry from Estonia put the fact that maybe his country was willing to withdraw because of the human rights situation in China and the fact that they did not agree on the basic principles and values behind it. So I don't know. Maybe we should question the survivability of the 17+1 and to ask us frankly if we would not be better off. Definitely.
Yeah, it does seem like maybe the Chinese missed their window there to perform on that in a way that could lure away Eastern European members of the EU, or like you say, non-members of the EU. But I think the other part of their strategy there, that is the Chinese strategy, is to complicate things within the EU. And we saw that with statements on the human rights situation or statements on South China Sea. And that if I hear you correctly, that seems to be losing some saliency, it seems, in those issues. I mean, we'll see how the next statements come out and you know, whether certain countries stand up and block them, but it does seem to be waning a little bit. You know,
I'm not going to drop any name here, but if you look at who voted against the joint communique, they are not all members of the 17+1.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There you have it. Okay. Well, I would like to get to another few questions, but that's all the time we have. This was a terrific discussion. I appreciate you, Emmanuel, going through so much trouble to be with us at the end of your day there, and Alex as well. Thank you for being with us today and for working through the technical issues. I think it looks a lot easier when it actually comes on screen than it takes for us to line these things up. So thank you very much for joining us. I just want to mention in closing that my email is there on the screen for members of the audience. If you want to follow up with me, I'm glad to continue to have the conversation or respond to anything that you may have to offer. And then I want to let you know we'll be sending out a survey after this as just standard Heritage SOP to make sure to get your feedback and to give us any ideas you have for future programs. In the meantime, check out heritage.org/events to see what else might be coming up that you might want to join in. So again, thank you very much, Emmanuel. Alex, so great to have you. I hope we can continue this conversation into the future. And thank you all to our guests. Have a very good day. Have a good night. Bonsoir in France. And we'll see you next time. Take care.